Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and even more excited to be in the company of such incredible professionals who are going to have this discussion today. But before we bring them on, I just want to level set us where we are. So the fact is, it's the end of 2020. The world is completely different as we know it. And as we know, earlier this year, many companies, after the murder of George Floyd went viral, pledged their commitment to Black equity and to DEI. But what's important here is that we know that often those commitments were words, not actions. And so what we want to do with this panel is help you see how recruiting can be a part of a broader organizational transformation strategy. And hopefully you walk away with things that you can do today. Because remember, it is not good enough to say that you care about diversity. It's what you do with it. So with that, I am so excited to bring on the incredible panel. And they'll introduce themselves, give you a little bit of an idea of how they're making the world a better place. So like I said, so much fabulousness. Jackye, would you tell us a little bit about all of the amazingness that you bring with us to us today?
Absolutely. All of the amazingness. I don't know if we have enough time. Just kidding. So hi, my name is Jackye Clayton. As you heard, I'm the DEI strategist here at SeekOut. My career started as a business analyst. I moved over to technical recruiting on the agency and the corporate side, and later went on to training and learning about HR tech. During that whole time, I was writing and training about diversity and inclusion, and finally were able to bring all of those things together to become the DEI strategist here at SeekOut. So thank you all for welcoming me into your homes, and I'm really excited to be on the panel.
And Jeremy, tell us a little more about yourself and Ascending and what you get up to there.
Yeah, of course. So hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jeremy Evan Smith. I'm based in Oakland, California, just outside of San Francisco, and proudly based in Oakland. And I am the founder and CEO of Ascending. Ascending is a software platform that helps teams to improve their culture and unlock diversity through scoring and benchmarks and really a data-driven approach. And so super excited to be here. Prior to Ascending, I come from a recruiting background. So loved sourcing, did a number of sourcing opportunities, starting out at Google and Facebook, and then finding my fit with smaller startups and really enjoying that. So I'm excited to be speaking to a number of people who are passionate about the same things.
And Caro, I know you're joining us from the GEM team, which has done a lot of work, but tell us about sort of your background and how you can help us see the world in a new way today.
Yeah, really excited to be here. My background is in recruiting, and actually I'm probably currently in a role that's very similar to a lot of the people dialing in today, leading recruiting and HR teams. And, you know, I am someone who just spends a lot of time thinking about DEI and continually learning about how to best approach HR and recruiting with that DEI first mindset. So really excited to be here on the panel today.
Awesome. So when we're thinking about undergoing organizational transformation and sort of becoming a company that does equity and inclusion, Aubrey talks about it, the first thing, I think the most crucial thing we all know is getting leadership buy-in. So Jeremy, you work with a lot of different companies. I'd love to know, like, how do you approach getting that leadership buy-in so that you're starting on a really strong foundation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of ideas come to mind that I've seen be really helpful. One of them is really rooted in building trust. And I think that trust can show up in a number of ways when you're looking for buy-in. I think one simple way and one great way to start is by creating conversations. And by creating conversations, it doesn't mean that you know everything or that you have the right answer all the time, but it means you're willing to be open to listen and be vulnerable. And I think that that really creates an opportunity where people see you and your commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion as authentic. And so that's a great way to really begin to build buy-in, but it's not the only piece. And so I think once we go from listening and creating space, it's important to actually take those learnings and apply those into new strategies and new ways of approaching, in this context, talent acquisition and recruiting and aspects like that.
Awesome. And Jackye, this is your everyday. So how do you approach this as you're sort of trying to help leaders evolve?
Well, I mean, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And so I like to look at the data first. And as we're speaking about this, you know, this is a really human element. But I like to look at things like, first, how many people that are diverse are leaving your company right now? How does your company look to the broad scheme of things? When we look across other organizations, what does your diversity makeup look like internally? And then I also like to look at what's available within the market. I think at a high level, when you're talking about executive and leadership buy-in, it really comes down to the numbers. And we already know, it's already been said that every time you add people to your team, I think it was, I am going to quote this wrong, but there was a percentage, it went up at least 1% in earnings that you made when you started adding diverse people to your role. So I like to show people where we are, how we got here, and what the future could look like if we add more people to the team, because we're more productive, they're earning more money. And so we show those things, and it's really easy to get buy-in from that perspective when you can break it down and align it with the business goals. And so that's generally where I like to start to get that buy-in.
And now, Caro, you're just like so many of our listeners and sort of sit not directly in the DEI seat, but really as kind of an ally to those efforts. So what do you see as your role or tactics that you've employed that have been successful?
Yeah. Well, I feel very lucky at GEM. I don't feel like I have to push very hard to get buy-in most of the time. But, things that I have noticed when bringing up DEI programs or initiatives, there are certain executives who certainly lean in or, feel like they off the bat want to help champion these things. And so I think advice I might give to others is to look for those. Those are great people to partner with to maybe help get things off the ground before bringing them to the broader leadership team. And then, along the lines of what Jackye said, tying the DEI initiatives back to broader business objectives is great. And for executives who might, be more hesitant to invest time or resources, I might also just suggest looking at what's on their plate. What things are they really focused on, whether it's projects or certain initiatives, and see if you can also tell that story back to them on how investing in the initiatives is gonna help them specifically too. I think is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. And so I know a lot of us know that we've seen those companies that see sort of a lack of representation as a recruiting problem, right? We just need to throw a couple Black people on our career site and we'll solve racism, which it turns out has not been super effective. But we also know that recruiting is a core part of the transformation process. And so, Jackye, I'd be curious how you've approached helping leadership understand that it's a yes and solution and not sort of the only answer there on recruiting, but it's recruiting and culture.
Well, I'm fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you look at it, to have a personal story with this, where I felt like I was in a bait and switch situation. Recruited in for my knowledge and expertise. When I got there, I was the only Black person there. And I literally said to them, there's less than 1% Black people in this community that I came to. And the response was, well, you're here now, so I guess it went up. And I was just horrified. And so I immediately started looking for another position within 2 days of starting my dream job. And so I think it's important to let people know, people are leaving and we are communicating. You might think it's a good secret internally, but people are talking, whether it be within employee research groups or just at the water cooler. And now we're seeing with people working remote, there are lots of different opportunities of getting knowledge and seeing what people are feeling, because this has been beyond just what we've seen at the office level. And so I like to let them know, this is what we're seeing. This is who's being successful. Where are people leaving and going? Especially if you're looking at diverse candidates, like I spoke about earlier, we can see who's leaving and where they're going. And when you see multiple people going to the same company, we have to see they're doing something that we're not. They're winning and we're losing. I looked at a company last week that they had lost in the last 5 years over 1,000 female candidates, and they all went to 2 different companies. And so it's listen, this is, we've already heard of the good old boys club. Well, we've got a club too. People who are diverse will pull other people over and look, this is a place where you can thrive and grow. And they're going to leave and they're going to tweet about it. And they're going to tell their friends and they're going to post about it on Facebook. So we have to let people know you can't hide from this information. And if you don't get on top of it, it has its way of working itself out.
I think that's Yeah, and Jeremy, what's your experience with this? Obviously, sort of culture and leveling it up is what you think about all day. But how do you like get people to understand that it's about a balanced approach?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question, and I feel like as a Black man and also a former recruiting professional, I sat in this very interesting space of being able to look at this experience and this problem on a day-to-day basis, and really debunk this myth that it's a pipeline problem, and also speak out to the irony that it's taking the issue and putting that on the folks who have been historically underrepresented and historically overlooked or underestimated, and saying like, you're the problem, you're not there, you're not findable, you're not searchable. And I think that anytime we're looking to find solutions, we probably shouldn't start with pointing the finger at someone else, but maybe we should start to look internally and say, maybe how are we just looking at a solution for this problem and just taking a small piece of it, which is recruiting, right? The employee life cycle and experience is more than just being recruited for a job, having a successful application, and then getting in the door. There's an entire career on the other side, and that's what you're really selling people on throughout the interview process. And so it's important that the culture that we have is really able to measure up to that magic that we're looking to really sell people on throughout that process. And so I think one tangible piece that we can sort of take from this, and something that I've seen really useful, is beginning to see recruiting and shape it and structure it more like we might look at our sales department, or maybe more like we look at even our user experience department or design department, right? If we were just creating a product and we didn't care about user experience, well, then we would know that it makes sense why someone might go look at another product, right? Or if we were going about sales and we just cared about building a better pipeline, but we weren't worried about closing and keeping or the customer success, then we might, have some, uptrends in our ARR, MRR, but we wouldn't actually get that long-term growth over time. So it's important for us to really start to think about how the entire piece can fit together. And that requires better culture as well as recruiting.
I love that. And it feels really related, Caro, to some of the things that we've chatted about. And I know this is your bread and butter, is really the tactics and like how to do it. And so when we think about, I know you have some stories around like, how do you adjust your sourcing and adjust the recruiting process to better connect with those candidates from underrepresented groups?
Yeah, I think it's about the signals that you're sending as a company around your own culture around belonging and inclusion. So I think first and foremost, you need to do the work to build that culture, and then you want to show it off. What's it like to work at your company? What work have you done there? Diversity it's a core value of GEM, so it's something that we've put a lot of time and thought into. And one thing that's really worked well for us is about, I think, a year and a half ago, our CEO, Steve, wrote a blog post about our own company's journey with DEI, why we chose diversity as a value, how we think about inclusion and belonging at the company, and what programs we have in place. And I actually will link this and reach out to candidates, this blog post, and it gets great traction. When I jump on the phone, people will cite this all the time as something that like really resonated and prompted them to reply to the email. So I think that's great. I think it also opens the door to let people know it's a safe space to ask questions around the culture. So I might recommend, putting the work in, getting the conversation started if you haven't already, about how to build that culture, and then finding a way to share that externally with the candidates you're working with.
And so I think the theme for 2020 from like all the DEI professionals I hear is like, yeah, but we need Black candidates, right? Because executives have finally figured out that they've only built programs for white women, and they're trying to catch up on, 400 years of messed upness in 3 months. And so I know that we've talked about this, but Jeremy, so we know there's these sort of broader strategies, but are there things when people are thinking about creating those opportunities for incredible Black professionals, what are the things that they need to be thinking about and conscious of to make sure that they're creating that fantastic experience for them?
Yeah, it's a real question. Obviously, it's a very personal question. In terms of the success that I feel like I've seen, even prior to Ascending in my own work and role and partnership with leads and leadership within an organization, I think it's important, first of all, to look within your own organization and ask, like, do we currently have Black folks within our org? And Are they individuals who might want to speak into this process? This isn't something that everybody from a historically underrepresented background, Black, Latinx, or otherwise, they might not have the bandwidth to speak into that, or they might have come from previous experiences where they've spoken up about it and have actually experienced retaliation. And so we can't assume that every single Black person will, or every single Latinx, or every single female identifying or transgender identifying individual will want to speak into whatever aspect of their intersectional identity is with diversity initiatives. But it's really important that we do look for those voices, if they, especially if they're within our organization. And if voices aren't currently reflected in your organization, do the work to go make some relationships, build relationships with people, because we can't just have voices. We're not just mouthpieces. We're entire human beings. So it's important that we're building relationship and connection with other folks, with one another, and allowing for those voices not just to be conversations that we can put on our social media or that we can put in our all hands, but actually apply some of those learnings and value those voices, whether it's through compensation or through leadership roles, things that have been talked about earlier within this panel as well. It's important to really take the time to listen, to learn, and to position yourself and posture yourself as someone who actually wants to move this and might not know exactly how to do this best.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, right? That it's about want, but being sort of honest about the fact that there are no answers. Jackye, I'm curious if you've seen, things that you're seeing are actually effective in this time. I'm sure just about everybody on LinkedIn is getting the "we care about diversity, you want a job" LinkedIn message. But what are you seeing that's working? And maybe are there things that you want to tell folks, like, actually don't do this, it is super uncomfortable, or like it will definitely not align with your intention?
Well, yes, I am so glad that you asked me the question. One of the things is that, like, there's always been this debate, like we're talking about times right now, right? And we talk a lot in the diversity space, we talk about white privilege. I don't know if it's in everybody's everyday conversation. When you work in the diversity space, you talk about it a lot. One of the privileges that you have is to be able to ignore some of these core issues. I would say that if you're a diversity recruiter, you can't ignore these core issues of what's going on, because it's going to affect how you're able to recruit and the things that you might want to consider. I have said in the past, there are days when I've called in Black in the past where I'm like, I can't take it. This is what's going on in my community, and I'm hurt and I'm worried and I'm scared. And I don't want to talk to you about the discount on the car last week. And you always want to say, did you see the news? And the answer is no, they haven't. And so if you're going to be in that space in the times today, 2020, you have to remember that when you're recruiting like Black women, you're also recruiting potentially parents. You might be looking at, whatever the situation, you're recruiting parents. When you're recruiting Black people, you could be recruiting them as well. We have issues with COVID within their communities. We know that COVID affects Black and brown people disproportionately higher. We know when that happens, and we're talking about education, you're talking about recruiting somebody that might have to deal with their child being there and needing that extra support. And so you have to understand, one of the things you might consider is that it might not be a real great day. Like, I think a lot of them, we call it, a lot of people, when you're calling diverse candidates, as a Black woman, I know when you call me and I say, the first time you're going to get, this is not a good time. Can we talk about this at another time? That's the first one. The second time, it's like, I've got to go. Like, I'm trying to share things with you. And if you're not cluing into everything that's going on within the environment, then all of a sudden, oh, well, she must be angry or she must be mad and I didn't do anything. And so this is uncomfortable for me. There's a thing that Brene Brown talks about, is like, embrace the suck. There's going to be some suckiness in this as you go through it. And I would say embrace the suck and embrace the discomfort. The other thing I think that's important is to let people know that you don't have a diverse environment when you're trying to recruit diverse people. You will start from the very beginning of joining that, bringing that trust, and you can also save yourself a lot of time. There are some people that are trailblazers in the space that'll go and want to create spaces. And then there's other people that are just tired and they don't want to volunteer as tribute today. It's just not my time. I don't want to do the fight right now. So call me when you get your staff together. And answer the questions honestly. Let them know what's going on. And it would be really great when people tell candidates how we're navigating through this space to help them feel safe. What happens if there's a situation that they feel could be racially, charged? What do I do as a Black woman if I feel like I'm being discriminated against at your company to make sure that this gets handled? Has this happened in the past? Do you have somebody who looks like me where I live that I can talk to about their experiences there? And just be honest, right? Especially when you're agency. As an agency recruiter, I always tell them, this company is paying me to find people that are underrepresented. And remember, when we say underrepresented, you can say underrespected, and make sure when you're going in that you're not letting that happen. So it should be the utmost respect as you're going in. Understand that is a fear. So
thank you so much for that. And one of the things that you brought in that I think is really important that we haven't touched on, to be very conscious of the world we're living in, which is we are in the middle of a pandemic. But we also know that people aren't affected equally by that. So if you're in the United States, we know that the federal government is basically committing genocide by public policy against Black and Brown communities, which is impacting candidates. But it turns out that the pandemic is also changing the way we think about talent. And Jeremy, I know you have a ton of opinions and experience with this. So how are you thinking, and companies you're working with, thinking differently about what it looks like to be remote first, or even COVID first, if that makes sense in terms of sourcing and recruiting people?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions to think about, because it's going to be a way of life for a while, as uncomfortable as it might feel. And then, on the other side of whatever a mass distributed vaccine looks like, and when we can safely return back into physical spaces together, things will be different. And so we need to be thinking about the role of remote work, or distributed work, whatever term one might prefer. And for this response, I'd like to borrow from my friend Kevin, who's works in product. And Kevin would often say that remote work is inclusion work. And so I really appreciate the way in which he would break that down. And a lot of what he was sharing related to the fact that it means that we might not have to choose, right? And so for someone like myself, like I mentioned earlier, I live in Oakland, but I'm originally from West Michigan. And, I have community, I have loved ones back in West Michigan. Personally, I was happy to transition over to the Bay Area. But for someone else who might have, a sense of real deep connection and community, it might be hard for them to have to choose between an amazing opportunity to join your company and leaving their loved ones, or leaving their place, or a place where they have roots. The beauty and the benefit of being on the forefront and embracing something like remote work or distributed work is that you can allow for someone to come into your company and bring all of themselves, or not have to leave part of themselves when they show up into the virtual doors or the real doors of your organization. And so there's a real opportunity to be able to see, this actually relates a lot to what Reid Hoffman was saying earlier, like see the opportunity within exactly what's going on right now. Yes, there are really difficult aspects to it. Many of us are feeling it in various ways. And there are also opportunities for us to grow with that. And I think just one tangible piece that we can take, especially as recruiting or talent acquisition professionals, is thinking about the organizations that have already been doing this work, particularly in tech, that might be accelerating some of the efforts that you're hoping to, or that you're just starting to build. So for instance, if you're looking to grow the representation of Black individuals, maybe in technical roles in your product or engineering department, maybe you should look to partner with an organization like DevColor. If you're looking to grow Latinx professionals that are within your organization in a variety of different roles, maybe you should look at Tecaria, and you should potentially financially invest, partner with them for events, support their efforts, because they've been doing this work for a while. And personally, when I think about the successes that I've had, they've been communal successes. They've been wins because of us, not because of an individual. And a part of that is partnering with them and joining into their work. And I think really when we take a more holistic approach like that, that's how we can begin to see the change, because we don't feel the pressure just on our shoulders.
I love that. Thank you. And now I know we're getting a little close to the end of our time, but I think what I want to know, we've talked a little bit about like what's happening and what has happened, but I'm sure everyone here says like, what does the future look like? right? So what I'd love for you all to share with everyone on the line is, what big idea are you excited to like lean into, ignore the white feminist connotations there, for the end of 2020 and sort of running into 2021? What's that big idea? Caro, I know this is something you and I have chatted a lot about. So like, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, one thing that's really top of mind for me right now is increasing the diversity of our leadership team at GEM. And for context, we have a fairly diverse team as a whole, but it's not equally reflected at the leadership level. So we have a lot of work to do around this. And I have a few initiatives in play to try to, do better here. And the one that I want to highlight as like the new idea for 2021 isn't going to solve the problem alone, but it's something that's a little bit more innovative, or at least I've never tried before. And it's around having the leadership team increase the diversity within their own professional networks, specifically with other underrepresented leaders within their own field. And the idea here is that if our leadership team has more diversity within their own networks, when they make referrals for roles within their team or adjacent to their team, they should have more diversity in their referrals. So each lead has actually committed to taking 1 or 2 phone calls a quarter just to network, which I'm really excited about. And another thing that I'm excited about with this is that people often, turn to their networks for advice. And so if you have a more diverse set of people to gather advice from, you're going to get better advice and more diverse perspectives. So excited to see how this goes.
And Jackye, what about you? What's like the thing that you're either excited to get after, or the thing you're excited other people to get after in the next 12 months?
I think I really love, because we're all remote, it's almost like party packs. It's like diversity party packs, right? Where we can share things with everyone. And you're just, because it's very difficult when you're in this huge office environment, maybe you send out a memo or this or that, but in order to bring people inclusive, you have the ability to send things to your whole team, inform them about what's going on, and get that piece so that we can try to be more inclusive. I think we've seen in the diversity space, that's the part that has been missing. And so I'm really excited about companies that are celebrating each other and not just acknowledging each other. I think that is a huge win for everybody within that space. So I'm really excited about things like that.
All right, Jeremy, now you're in the hot seat. What is the thing that you're excited about that you think is going to help us build the world that we all actually deserve?
Yeah, so my big idea that makes me excited is actually a really small idea. It's humility. And I think that to me is what makes me most excited as I think about what 2021 might look like. I think humility shows up in coming to spaces to listen and to learn. Humility shows up in saying, I don't have all the answers, or I might not know what to say in the moment. Humility shows up in asking for help. Humility shows up in believing folks' stories that might contradict with your individual experiences. And so I think many folks who are really committed to the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion, in essence, are saying they're committed to humility. They're committed to learning. They're committed to building. They're committed to a long process. And so I think there's a lot there. And, I think taking a data-driven approach like Steve was talking about in the beginning of the kickoff for this morning, and using data to tell stories is going to be a great way for us to learn. And I think really resonates with everything that's been said, even in these final remarks related to building relationships and celebrating one another. So humility is my small idea that's a big idea. So.
I love that. And it's probably something that's not just good when it comes to thinking about building equitable organizations, but probably just humaning in general, right? Leveling up everything at the same time. So we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to take some questions from the audience, let folks be a little participatory. So please send through your questions if you have some. I know we have a couple in right now. So one of the questions we got was, someone would love to hear thoughts on specifically systemic bias in the interview and selection process. So a really tactical question about like, how does that show up and what actions can you take to start to mitigate that?
I have an answer for that because I've been working with that with a lot of various clients, generally in looking at like job descriptions and how it reflects on an underrepresented candidate. So for example, one thing that's common is it'll say continuous leadership responsibilities, or that you've grown into a leadership position. If you're an underrepresented candidate, it might not be that. It might look more like a staircase than a full ramp. And so I would explain the system, because a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? Like, they went to college and they got their degree, and what happened? I don't understand why this is happening. And so you have to look at these gaps as not, oh, this could have been a problem that they didn't have a job, but it could have been that they had a boss that didn't work well with them, or a community. Why did they leave this job so soon? Like, talk to them to get the stories and get a better understanding of what underrepresented people's resumes can look like versus somebody who might be of the majority group, and how that might be different. And again, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And so you have to call it out in advance. These are the things that we are not looking at. These are the things that are important. These are the skills that we have to work at. We're not looking at these titles or these colleges or these things. We need this core behavior. And once we get to that core behavior, before you get to any place else, that's what's going to be the most important. You're not looking for a best friend. This isn't an interview for a neighbor. This is to get a job done. So we need to focus on that and explain to them how those other things are distractive, how the system has grown distractions of what our expectations are. And I think that you have to do that on a regular basis before they'll start doing it when you come to you. But start out with that when you're talking to the hiring managers in advance. Prep them for what they could see and explain those things every single time.
I love that, Jackye. And I feel like you got at this idea. I always say that like culture fit is the most dangerous and low standard way to hire ever. But thinking about that, right, you're talking about looking for this very narrow sort of sameness. And one of the questions we got relates to this idea around networks, right? Not just the sameness of selection, but the systemic bias that exists in networks. And Carol, this was something you brought up when you said, in your big idea. And so for you, when you're thinking about helping people diversify their networks, how do you do that? What actions have you taken and what have you seen from it?
Yeah, well, we've approached this tactfully to make sure that we're driving valuable connections for our leaders. So we have a few people on recruiting working on this, and meeting with our leaders to ask them, hey, where could you use advice, and what other leaders would you like to talk to in your field? Also, what leadership positions might be opening in the next 1 to 5 years for you? So getting a general idea there, and then sourcing and pulling profiles. Obviously, this also starts with buy-in, right, from the leadership team, that this is an initiative that they find value in and want to take part in. So yeah, excited to see how that works out.
I love that. All right. We have another question in from Daryl Graves. I see you over at Dialpad. So Daryl would love some high-level thoughts on how to frame those work standardized candidate experiences. So things like sourcing emails, phone, video screens, representative interview panels. What is the framing that you're using to do this? Because certainly y'all are doing things, but it's really about creating that team effort. Is there particular language that you're using or ways that you're helping people understand why they need to show up a certain way?
I was waiting to see if Jeremy was going to jump in.
I took a long draw of breath, and I was like, how should I respond? I will quickly say something mostly based off of prior experiences in an organization where we had 30% representation of Black and Latinx folks for a Series C startup. And so standardizing processes and creating a reliable framework was really instrumental in doing that, mostly because it made it super easy to pull data. Like when you don't have comparable things, then you're adjusting things, it's just not like, imagine if your spreadsheet was like A1 is very different than B2 or whatever. It's really important to standardize that. And so I think as you're creating a framework, one of the key parts is, and this really gets at an earlier session as well, talk to your hiring lead and see what's actually priority for this role. Why is this rec open? And as a recruiting professional, do you understand why that's open? What's the urgency with that? And then define sort of the core characteristics of what you really need for that process or for that candidate or for that ideal candidate, and then sort of expand from there. I think that will help to begin to inform and make things more clear as you then think about, as a recruiting professional, as a sourcer, how you go about sourcing folks you're looking for, because you have a core set and a clear shared understanding. And then you can take that and you can add the other aspects of, you know, from this background or from that background or from this creative experience or outside of the norm of how you're thinking about it. But having something that you all agree on and having clarity on that, I think, is critical in being able to set up a reliable framework.
I want to jump in really quick and add, video is we have to now, right? Because of COVID, a majority of us have to do all of our interviews on video if we hadn't before. I think it's really important, if you're really serious about DEI and you're really trying to get the work, you have one video. You use that one video to have all of the different questions, and everybody look at that one video to see if there's anything else going on within the interview process, rather than have one person interview with multiple people over and over and over again. Because, you know, we do know that this is stressful times. We do know that people's kids are at home, or we don't know how long they've been without work, or if they're sick or anything else. There's a lot of stressors going on. Allow them to record and send you like their best self when they're feeling the best, and that you don't catch them when their Wi-Fi just went out because they came to this video interview and then they're fifth graders in the other room screaming because they missed out on an opportunity. Do it that way, so then you give them the opportunity to be their best selves, but then everyone who's on the interviewing panel is seeing the same thing, so we can make sure that we all got the same thing from that same interview. That also allows us to bring up those questions and say, you saw it like this, but I saw it like this, especially if you have a diverse panel looking at the situation. It's like the movie Get Out, you know, it's like my white friend said, oh, I'm so glad the cops are there. And I said, holy crap, the cops are coming. Done. And then we had a conversation about how we viewed it different based on our experiences. So I recommend taking that approach, video by video, one video per session that everybody gets to look at. So just wanted to throw that in there.
I love that. Thank you. Now, I know we're getting tight on time, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions that came in that are really great. So we have one that says, how do you handle pushback on DEI initiatives or training? But another question that I think is related is, can you comment on how political correctness may hurt DEIB efforts? So we know that often one of the pushbacks on that training is this is just about political correctness. So when you've seen that, what kind of response do you have? How do you help people understand the purpose and why maybe it's just not the PC police?
I would love to just really quick chime in because I think it relates to bias, which is something I think about a lot. And so many people, because of the way that bias, especially in the tech community and especially in more recent years, has come up, it's just held a negative connotation. But biases aren't in and of themselves negative. They're shortcuts that our brains make. Like, so if you see a bear and you're in your car, you're gonna be like, holy shit, like that's a bear. Like I should be nervous, right? But if you see a black man, you shouldn't have that same response, right? So that's a bad bias, but the first one's a good bias. And so I think when we relate that to political correctness, or we relate that to why we're doing this work, we need to recognize that maybe we had some good biases that served us at certain points, right? Maybe we were like, I went to Stanford, and so other people from Stanford are good because I'm good. But the negative bias that might have come from that is saying, well, someone who went to Michigan or Michigan State or, whatever, right, aren't as good, right? That's a bad bias. And so it's important for us to be able to really look at and get below the surface of throwing political correctness or throwing this thing that really is just a deflective response, and actually realize, why are we even having this conversation? Why has this even come up? We could talk about the business cases. We really don't need to because it's already there. There's enough data. You can go Google it. But really recognize how, as individuals and how people, which are in relationships with one another, which is what a corporation is, like we are in relationship with one another. So we should think about maybe how those biases have served us, but how they might no longer be serving us.
I love that. Thank you. And so related to this idea of bias and things like that, Alicia, sorry, we don't have pronunciations on this, has a really great point here, which is that Black women are fired or end up quitting a lot for being angry or not being a cultural fit quotations very much intended. How have you seen, what effective strategies have you seen for educating others about these microaggressions and biases so they're not creating that shit environment for really incredible colleagues?
I will tell you, I'm reading a book right now that's called No, You Shut Up. That was about one of the people that wrote, Simone, I forgot her last name, but it's just talking about having to have those leadership conversations. And the other thing, when you talk about that, I'm a Black woman and I'm angry. Like, why should I be happy? Tell me why I should be grateful and happy before you start coming to me. Like, maybe you should ask the question as if you would ask anyone else. Well, I didn't do that to you. Why are you feeling that way? And get to the root of it so you can stop those. I guarantee if you dealt with the core issues and you just tried to be nice and inviteful and inclusionary as a practice, you wouldn't see as much pushback or people being afraid. This is talking about psychological wellness within companies. You have to be able to be your whole self. And this is for those that say, I always say, I'm not loud, I'm passionate. And so if this comes across a certain way, I try to preface it when I feel it. You can kind of feel it in the back of your head where it's like, oh, this is going to be handled a certain way. But if it's something that you are passionate about, you have to still be able to express yourself. And you let somebody know, like, I'm passionate about this, and let other people know within the organization. This is something that's happening, and it doesn't happen for everyone. Maybe someone's in a bad mood. That's why it's like, why do we have to be happy and bouncy around all the time? This is real life. If we're working at work, it's real life. It's different between somebody feeling a certain way and attacking somebody. Those are two completely different issues. So I think that it's important, if you are one of those organizations, you think somebody's like that in your organization, there could be something happening that this person could need assistance with, and they're stressed out. And right now we're all stressed out. So I don't know why we aren't all angry people right now. Yeah. It's a miracle that people are holding it together as they should, where, it's always something else. So show grace. I also let people know in advance of what I'm dealing with, to have that transparency. If you can't have that transparency at work, it's time to look for another job, period. That's it.
So I feel like that energy is, unfortunately, have to wrap up, but if we could end on energy, that's what I would have scripted. So thank you. But all right. So I'm sure everyone on the line feels the exact same way, but I am so grateful to have gotten to be in conversation with you and all the incredible wisdom and brilliance that you shared. And if you can forgive me for tightening everything down, what we've learned today first is be intentional. You've got to get buy-in through conversation, and it's not just about recruiting, but that is a tool that we have to be humble, and we should all be angry as hell. Because that's how we create change. So I want to thank so much all of you and Jem for creating this space for us where we can have these real conversations. And my challenge to everybody on the line is, what are you going to do today, and what are you going to do tomorrow with that righteous anger that you have to create the opportunity and the world that we all deserve? I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day and an awesome rest of the Jem Summit.
Cool. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.